"You're awesome. No one can stand you," the narcissist said. That phrase that went through me like a punch, said in the living room with the television light on and the sound low so that only I could hear. At that moment, I realized that the man who claimed to love me could not stand my strength, only diminished it until I myself began to believe that I was a burden. At first, they were subtle comments. If I spoke loudly at a gathering of friends, the narcissist would later mutter, with that cold smile, "You exaggerate. You're embarrassed." If I got emotional, he accused me of drama. It was a cycle of manipulation that made me doubt my own reactions. The narcissist used gaslighting as if breathing, natural, constant, poisonous. I tried to explain that it hurt me, but the silent treatment was his cruelest response. He punished me with emptiness, and I dragged myself trying to win him back. There was a day when I went out to work in a new dress. In the car, he looked me up and down and said in a low voice, "Are you going like this? It seems that it is begging for attention." I felt my body shrink. This was the most difficult psychological abuse. It taught me to be ashamed of existing. I became a victim of a toxic relationship, where every gesture was evaluated as excess, and when I kept quiet so as not to provoke, he accused me of being cold. There was no way out. At my mother's birthday party, in front of the whole family, he interrupted my speech. "Sorry, she always talks too much. She likes to be the center of attention." Everyone laughed, but I swallowed my tears with a dry cake in my throat. It was an emotional abuse designed to reduce me, to put me in the place of someone who should be less. At that moment, I realized the level of control he had. He molded me in front of others, and I became the caricature he invented. "You're not too much. I'm too small to support you." This phrase never came out of his mouth, but echoed in my mind as a secret response to each humiliation. Another phrase of his, which still bleeds inside me: "If you were calmer, I would really love you." I tore myself apart, trying to fit into a non-existent version of myself while it fed off my trauma. Today I still ask myself, will I ever be able to speak without fear of being called exaggerated? His silence still haunts me. And I remember waking up at dawn to find him scrolling over his phone screen, laughing to himself. I asked him what it was, and he replied dryly, "You don't need to know everything. It's not about you." The ice I felt in that sentence still burns. It was another chapter of narcissistic abuse, made to put me in the victim's shoes, to show that control would always be in his hands. I would go back to bed pretending to sleep, while my head throbbed. What if there was another one? Or worse, what if the other was just an excuse to destroy me inside? Over time, I realized that the treatment of silence was not the absence of words. It was a weapon. He spent days without looking at me, without responding, walking around the house as if I were invisible. And when he finally opened his mouth, he said, "Do you see? Your energy is suffocating. I can't breathe near you." It was such a refined gaslighting that I felt guilty even for the air I exhaled. I tried to apologize, begging for attention, and each time I did it, I became more fragile in the face of manipulation. One night, after another fight in which he accused me of being excessive, I tried to go outside to breathe. I took the key, but he stood at the door. "It's not going anywhere. You're the one who needs to control yourself." That was the height of psychological abuse, the invasion of my freedom. The house became a prison, and I became a prisoner of a toxic relationship that sucked away any remaining vestige of courage. The peak of the pain was when I collapsed in front of him, crying without being able to speak, and I heard, "Look, that's what you are, a burden, an invented victim." At that moment, I understood that there was no room for my heart there. I was facing a narcissist who would never stand my strength, would only feed on it until I lost myself. He didn't want less from me. He wanted nothing from me. It wasn't that I was too much. It was that he was too little. I still wake up in the middle of the night with the feeling of apologizing for existing. If you have been through something like this, comment below because I want to hear your reports. The taste of the coffee cooling in his mouth still reminds me of that day when he pushed the cup away and said, "You talk like you know things, but you don't know anything." I froze inside. It was a form of psychological abuse that seemed banal to outsiders, but to me it was a cruel reminder. My voice had no value. The narcissist fed on this invented hierarchy, where he was always the wise one, the owner of the truth, and I, the infantilized victim who should just comply. The worst thing was the silent repetition of these scenes, In the car, in front of the bakery, he would turn down the radio and stare at me sideways. "You're too intense. No one takes you seriously like that." I watched the street pass by the window, trying to take a deep breath so as not to respond, because I already knew. If I spoke, he would use it against me. If I kept quiet, the silent treatment would begin soon after. No matter what I did, manipulation always found a way to crush me. I began to realize how much my body reacted. Her heart raced just hearing the sound of his key entering the lock. Anxiety swallowed me even before any words. This is what no one understands about a toxic relationship. The trauma settles in the bones, in the skin, in the gaze that looks for signs of danger in every gesture. I wasn't living, I was surviving, and I still blamed myself, believing his words that I was too much for anyone to bear. One night, when I got home, I found him sitting on the couch with my diary in his hands. He laughed at my notes, as if they were jokes. "Look at this here. You feel like a victim of emotional abuse." "Victim? Do you listen to yourself?" I tried to tear the notebook out, but he held on tight and said, "If anyone saw what you write, they would laugh at you just like me." It was an invasion of everything that was left of my innermost self. The humiliation was so deep that for seconds, I wished I disappeared. There I understood that his control was not only over my body or my gestures, but also over my thinking. The next day, at the family lunch, he leaned over to his sister and said out loud, "Maria keeps complaining that I'm cold. It's just that she doesn't understand what it's like to have to deal with someone so exaggerated." Laughter echoed around the table. I swallowed the rice without chewing. That was a public narcissistic abuse, masquerading as a joke, a violence that no one noticed, because the narcissist knows how to dress with charm and seduction in front of others. And I stood there, a prisoner of a version of me that he created for everyone's eyes. I started to question my own reality. When I said it hurt, he replied, "That's all in your head. Gaslighting, always. A distortion so constant that I began to wonder if I really wasn't what he said. You're too intense. You're too fragile. You're too dramatic." I became too much in everything, and at the same time, insufficient in anything I tried to be. That was the game. Manipulation and control until I had no identity left. The most brutal crisis happened on a trip. In the hotel room, after I questioned why he spent hours on his cell phone, he exploded. He shouted that I was sick, that I needed help, that no one could stand my paranoia. I cried so much I could barely breathe. He stood looking at me on the floor and said, "Look how you stand. It's ridiculous." That was the point at which I realized the extent of the emotional abuse I was carrying. I begged for love as he crushed me with contempt. He didn't want my love. He wanted my silence. It wasn't excess. It was too much freedom for someone who only knew how to live in control. And yet, when he slept next to me, I kept looking at his face and wondering if he would ever wake up regretful. The trauma made me expect the impossible, that the narcissist would recognize the damage he caused. But each dawn brought the same scene. Him in the mirror, straightening his hair, and me behind, invisible, trying to put pieces of me together. To this day, when I hear someone say that I am intense, I feel a lump in my throat, because I still don't know if this word is praise or sentence. I remember one gray morning, the rain running down the window as I tried to make coffee in silence. He came into the kitchen, picked up the mug, and without looking at me said, "You ruin the day just by existing in this exaggerated way." The phrase fell inside me like acid. I trembled, but I didn't answer. The silent treatment had already begun, even before any attempt at defense. The narcissist had the gift of turning the simple act of breathing into an accusation against me. At work, I was no longer the same. Colleagues commented that I was more withdrawn, less smiling. Psychological abuse haunted me even outside the home, like a shadow attached to my body. During a meeting, while I was talking, my cell phone vibrated. A message from him. "Are you showing off? I bet they're already laughing at you." My heart raced. My hands sweated, and I forgot what it was saying. There was absolute control. He didn't even need to be present to shut me up. At night, in bed, I tried to talk. I asked him why he always belittled me. He smiled from the side, that cold smile he already knew, and replied, "I only tell the truth that no one has the courage to tell you." That was the poison of gaslighting, turning cruelty into apparent sincerity. I turned to the side, swallowing tears, while he turned off the light and slept as if nothing had happened. The victim was always me, and he, the infallible judge of my existence. One Sunday we went to church. I wanted to feel at peace, but until then he found a way to crush me. When the pastor asked everyone to pray together, he whispered in my ear, "Look how emotional you are. People are thinking you are ridiculous." My body contracted, and prayer became an effort not to fall apart. Emotional abuse even seeped into the space where I sought refuge. Once again, I was torn between faith and shame, between wanting to believe in God and believing that I wasn't as fragile as he said. The biggest explosion happened on a friend's birthday. We were in a circle laughing when I gave an opinion on politics. He interrupted me loudly, in front of everyone. "Okay, Maria wants to be an intellectual again. No one can stand so much drama and intensity." Laughter echoed, and I wanted to disappear. I looked at the faces and saw that they believed in him. The narcissist not only disarmed me at home, but also destroyed my image in public. It was narcissistic abuse designed so that no one would believe me, so that I would be isolated. That night, back in the car, he turned on the radio at full volume. I was silent, with tears flowing, until he suddenly hung up and said, "See, you only know how to cry. That's what you are, a burden." It was at that moment that I felt the collapse. I no longer knew whether to cry because of humiliation, fear, or the certainty that I would never be seen as someone whole. It wasn't that I was too much. It was that he couldn't stand someone he couldn't completely control. He didn't want my strength. He wanted my erasure. To this day, when I close my eyes, I still hear his phrase whispered in the dark. "You ruin everything just by existing." And the echo of this poison continues inside me, as if it were impossible to turn off his voice from my own conscience. That morning, I sat on the cold bathroom floor with the towel wrapped around my shoulders, trying not to sob loudly so as not to wake him up. I kept repeating to myself, "I'm not awesome. I'm not awesome." But with each attempt, his voice came through my head, mocking, "You're a walking exaggeration, a victim who plays the martyr." The narcissist no longer needed to speak. I myself did the work of repeating their cruelties. This is the most devastating effect of a toxic relationship, when emotional abuse turns into an inner voice. The next day I set the breakfast table. I put bread, butter, hot coffee, everything in order, as if I was trying to negotiate a little peace. He sat down, bit into the bread, and said without looking at me, "You keep trying to make up for it, but it's never going to be enough." The bread stuck in my throat. It was proof that his control was not in the details, but in the constant feeling of failure that he gave me. No matter what I did, I was always going to be the victim who bore the blame for everything. Later in the car, as we drove to visit his parents, I dared to ask, "Why do you never recognize anything good in me?" He laughed contemptuously, "Because there is nothing. You just think you have it." The laughter echoed in the closed car, and I felt my stomach churn. Gaslighting worked like that. It destroyed any glimmer of self-worth before it could even blossom. I looked at the road, thinking if speeding up and disappearing would be less painful than continuing to live like this. At his family's house, another scene. I went to tell a funny story from his childhood, and in the middle of the speech he interrupted me. "You know how she is, always making it up. He loves to attract attention." Everyone laughed, and I smiled so as not to expose the wound. But inside, every laugh was a cut. The narcissist had built a version of me that I no longer recognized, but that everyone believed. And I kept quiet, because any attempt to defend myself became too much drama. At night, in the guest room, he lay down and turned to the side without saying anything. I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, breathing heavily. I thought about getting up, about getting out of there, but fear held me. The treatment of silence was worse than the screams. It turned me into a ghost. And I wondered all the time, will I ever be heard? The explosion came weeks later. I was exhausted, and when he accused me again of being too intense, I lost control. I screamed, cried, hit the table. He looked at me with calculated calm and said, "See? That's it. You're crazy. You're the problem." It was as if all the psychological abuse had been summed up in that moment. He provoked me to the limit, and when I broke, he used it as proof that I was unbalanced. He never loved me. He just used me as a mirror to reflect his own shadow. I wasn't too much. I was just whole, and he only knew how to love broken halves. Today, I carry this invisible scar. I still feel the trauma in my body, in the fear of speaking loudly, in the fear of smiling too much, of crying too much, of existing too much. And the question that never remains silent within me is, will I ever believe that being whole is not a sin? I still remember the sound of the door slamming as he left after yet another argument. I stood in the room, motionless, as if my body had been emptied. The television turned on at a low volume showed images that I could not decipher. The mind only repeated his last sentence. You ruin everything because you don't know how to control yourself. I felt my chest tighten, and it was as if I was living an infinite déjà vu. This is the cycle of narcissistic abuse. Nothing ever ends. It just repeats itself with new forms of wound. On his cell phone, dozens of deleted messages. He would write, delete, write again. And when something finally came, it was an accusation. You should be thankful that I'm still here. This was the cruelest manipulation. To turn my suffering into debt. I, the victim, needed to beg the narcissist to stay, even if it was to keep destroying me. The loneliness I felt was not his absence. It was too much of a presence of his control. Sometimes I tried to react in silence, to keep a small part of me that he didn't reach. She read books in secret, wrote loose sentences on papers that she then tore up. But even that he discovered. One night, he found a note in the trash where I had written, I must survive. He laughed, came close to my ear and said, You're pathetic. Survive on what? Of your own madness? At that moment, I understood that there was not even room to think about freedom without him trying to crush me. Simple scenes became torture. At the market, if I chose a product, he would change it and say in a low voice, You don't understand anything. You always exaggerate even when shopping. In front of the cashiers, she smiled as if she were the perfect husband. I held the bags and the lump in my throat. The psychological abuse was not only in the big explosions, but in these invisible details that corroded who I was, until there was only what he wanted me to be. Weak, submissive, silent. But the apex was at a meeting of friends. I was tired of being interrupted, so I kept quiet all night. When we got home, he looked at me and said, You're speechless because you know no one can stand to hear you. It's better this way. It was at that moment that I understood the complete perversity of gaslighting. If I spoke, it was too much. If I kept silent, I was confirmed as irrelevant. There was no way out, just a labyrinth where every step was a trap. One morning, I couldn't resist. I sat down before him and asked, Do you really love me? He did not immediately respond. He just smiled and said, I like you when you're smaller than you think you are. That sentence was the final knife. There was no love, only desire for control. I wasn't a partner. It was just material for him to manipulate and feel bigger. I wasn't the one who was broke. He was the one who could not stand my wholeness. His silence was more deafening than any scream I have ever received in my life. To this day, when I hear someone knock on a door, my body contracts. And when someone calls me intense, my mind still asks, am I living or just repeating the scars he left? There was one night when I woke up short of breath. I had dreamed that he was on top of me, holding me by the shoulders, repeating, You're awesome. You suffocate. You ruin everything. When I opened my eyes, he was really there, lying next to me, breathing easy, but my body trembled as if the dream had been real. That's what trauma does. It installs the narcissist inside you, even when he's not talking, even when he's sleeping. At breakfast, I mustered up the courage to say that I could no longer stand the public humiliations. He raised his eyebrow, chewed slowly, and replied, You make up stories, Maria. No one has ever humiliated you. That's all in your head. Gaslighting in its purest form. I wanted to scream, but I just smiled yellow. He had even stolen the certainty of what I experienced. One Saturday, I decided to go out on my own to walk. I told him I would be back in an hour. When I arrived, he was in the living room, motionless, looking at his watch. You spent 10 minutes of the agreement. It shows that you can't be trusted. I wanted to argue, but he had already stood up, throwing the remote control on the table. This was the cycle of manipulation, turning any detail into proof that I was to blame. And I, as a victim, carried the guilt like an invisible chain. The cruelest episode happened in front of my family. I had prepared a special dinner. Everyone laughed, and for a few moments I felt free, owner of my space, until he stood up and said in a joking tone, "You know how Maria is. He always exaggerates everything, even food. It seems that he needs to prove something." Laughter echoed through the table. I smiled, but inside my soul imploded. The emotional abuse in front of the people I loved most was the stab that left me bleeding in silence. That night, in the room, I couldn't stand it. I asked him if he was proud to destroy me. He stared at me coldly and replied, "I just show you who you really are. You should thank me." Those words still vibrate in my mind like electric current. He didn't see himself as an aggressor, but as the owner of the truth, and I as the too much woman who needed to be corrected. He didn't kill my voice. He taught my voice to be silent on its own. His love never was. It was just a cover for control. Today, I still feel the weight of that shadow. Sometimes I find myself apologizing without knowing why. Sometimes I shut up when I wanted to speak. And when I look in the mirror, I wonder if I'll ever see the version of me that existed before him, or if this woman was buried along with all the words he never let me say. There was a day when I came home happy, after having received a compliment at work. I walked through the door wanting to share the achievement. But before I could say anything, he looked at me and said, "You only talk about yourself. You seem desperate for attention." The glow I was carrying went out right away. The narcissist couldn't stand to see me whole, and the psychological abuse came disguised as logical criticism. I walked up the stairs in silence, feeling that even my victories were stolen. In the bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed and heard his footsteps rise behind me. He came in, crossed his arms and said, "See? It's already making drama. Nobody likes those who exaggerate so much." There I understood the trap. If I kept silent, I was cold. If I spoke, it was too much. I lived in a prison with no doors, where any movement was used against me. This is the essence of a toxic relationship. The constant manipulation until the victim doubts their own breathing. The other day, we were in the car, stuck in traffic. I tried to talk about a trip I dreamed of taking. He snorted and replied, "You never stop, always inventing impossible things. Do you not get tired of being like this?" I looked out the window, the red lights reflecting off the glass, and thought, it's tired, but not dreaming. It's tired of being cut. But he said nothing. I already knew. Any word would become fuel for gaslighting. The cruelest scene took place in public. At a dinner party with friends, I was telling a simple story from childhood. He interrupted me loudly. Here she comes again, finding herself interesting. Guys, be patient, because Maria always exaggerates everything. Laughter filled the room. I kept smiling, but inside I felt my body falling apart into pieces. The emotional abuse in public was calculated, made to reduce me in front of everyone, while he won the role of the charming man who just played. On the way home, in the car in silence, I tried to hold back the tears. He noticed and said indifferently, "Are you crying?" I was just being honest. The problem is that you don't know how to hear the truth. Once again, the manipulation was dressed in honesty. I turned my face to the window, knowing that at that moment, I had no right to even my own crying. Over time, I realized that my identity had been eroded. I no longer knew if I was strong or fragile, exaggerated or dull, intense or cold. I was just the reflection of his accusations, and this confusion was part of the control. The more lost I felt, the more dependent I became. He didn't love me. He edited me. I wasn't too much. I just didn't fit into the little he was. Today, I still struggle to regain my voice, but every time I try to speak louder, I feel the echo of that cutting phrase, "You're awesome," and his silence still responds inside me, like a sentence that never ends. I remember one morning when I woke up before him, sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my own hands. They seemed fragile, trembling, as if they were no longer mine. I thought, at what point did I stop being me? But when he woke up, he looked at me disdainfully and said, "You've already started the day with that poor face. You spoil even silence." The impact was like an invisible slap. Psychological abuse didn't need yelling. All it took was this calculated coldness that reduced me to nothing even before the sun rose. Sometimes I tried to answer, but it was always in vain. One afternoon, after he accused me of being too dramatic, I boldly said, "I'm just being human." He laughed out loud, that laughter that cut like a blade, and retorted, "You're not human, you're a burden. Whoever lives with you needs to have the patience of a saint." I felt my chest close, because I realized that in front of him, any defense turned into proof of my guilt. This is the essence of gaslighting, distorting reality until the victim is convinced that they are wrong for existing. At dinner with coworkers, I was silent, almost motionless. A friend nudged me and said, "Why don't you say anything?" Before I could answer, he said aloud, "It's better this way. When you talk too much, no one can stand it." Laughter filled the table. The narcissist fed on these moments, on the power to expose myself as ridiculous in front of others. It was a public emotional abuse, and the worst thing is that no one noticed. To them, it was just a joke. For me, it was another open wound. Back home, in the car, the treatment of silence was absolute. He drove, staring at the road, without saying a word to me. When I tried to speak, I said only, "It doesn't spoil the night with its intensity." I cringed on the bench, feeling that my presence was always a mistake. That's the weight of living in a toxic relationship, being by someone's side and at the same time, feeling alone. One night, I couldn't stand it. I asked, "Have you ever thought about how I feel when you diminish me?" He stared at me and replied with cruel calmness, "If you were stronger, you wouldn't feel diminished." The narcissist even turned my pain into a defect, as if I was guilty of suffering. And I, already lost in so many manipulations, began to believe that maybe he was right. But the worst memory still crosses me. We were at a family lunch. I tried to tell an achievement of the work, but before I finished, he said, "You know Maria, right? He always exaggerates." It must have been a small thing, but in her head it becomes great. Everyone laughed. I smiled with tears in my eyes, and at that moment, I understood. He didn't just want to silence me. He wanted to steal my own life narrative. He didn't just destroy my words. He destroyed the space where they could exist. It wasn't me who was awesome. It was he who was never enough to support me. To this day, when someone asks me something simple, I feel the urge to measure every word, afraid of being exaggerated. The trauma remained, like an echo that tells me, "Be careful, someone will laugh at you again." And I keep trying to relearn how to speak without apologizing for existing. There was one last night when his mask fell off completely. I was sitting on the couch, silently, and he came up to me, annoyed by something banal, the remote control he couldn't find in place. With his eyes fixed on mine, he said, "You will never be enough for anyone. I just tolerate you." Those words were like slow knives entering my chest. There I understood that nothing I did would change the game. I would always be the victim chosen for his pleasure of dominating. I went upstairs to the bedroom, closed the door, and stared at my reflection in the mirror. I saw a woman exhausted, with her shoulders drooping and her eyes red, but still with a small flame burning deep inside. I realized that he hadn't killed my strength. He had just convinced me to hide it. The truth was different. It wasn't me who was too much. He was the one who couldn't stand everything I carried. The trauma continues, and may never go away. I still feel his silence like a weight inside my chest. I still hear his mocking laughter echoing when I try to believe in myself. But today I know that it was not love. It was psychological abuse disguised as care. It was manipulation disguised as sincerity. It was gaslighting disguised as truth. He didn't want my love. He wanted my erasure. It wasn't that I was too much. It was that he was always too little. And now, every time the echo of his voice returns, I cling to this bitter certainty. What he called exaggeration has always been my strength, and it is with her, even wounded, that I follow. There is no end. If you've experienced something similar, share your story in the comments. Your voice can help another victim of narcissistic abuse realize that they are not alone. What exists is the scar that never closes.